Well, hello. I would like to welcome everyone to our YouTube channel, Advice on College Admissions and Testing. I'm your host, Brendan Gallagher. I'm with Tutor Doctor Northern Columbus here in the lovely state of Ohio. I'm joined by some of my colleagues around the country.
I would like to welcome everyone to our YouTube
Jessica Bush from Tutor Doctor in lovely New Jersey.
channel, Advice on
We have
College.
Byron Zom, who is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then the incomparable Chris Lian, who is in San Diego, lovely San Diego, California. On this video, we're going to be talking about both study skills as well as executive functioning skills, which we sometimes refer to as X skills. These are the mental processes that enable us to plan and prioritize and organize, stay focused, remember instructions and juggle multiple tasks successful. So, these are skills that are equally or even more important sometimes than the subject matter that students are learning. So all what it takes to be a successful student. So who wants to kick off the discussion this evening and tell us some stories?
Well, okay. Well, it's good to be here with all of you guys. And, when it comes to executive function skills, we have found, that it's one of those things that is so foundational to the success of not just a student, but success in life, because those skills we're using or not using on a daily basis, right? And it's how we use those skills that determine are we going to be accomplishing the things that we have? And all of us have responsibilities, whether you're a student or you're working a job, we all have responsibilities, and how we're going about executing those is what makes us successful or not, or more successful or less successful. And in this particular conversation, we're kind of narrowing it down to students, right? And that could be students of any age, particularly middle school and up. But what I've seen happen in my world is that people are calling us because they're looking for tutoring, because they're seeing that their student is underperforming, and the automatic response or assessment as far as a parent is concerned often is that they need a tutor to help support them with their academics. And that's often the case. A student often does need, whether it's remedial or enrichment support. But one of the things I've noticed is that not uncommon is that they're missing these important organizational type skills to keep things in balance and manage the plates that are involved in carrying a workload at school. So if your student is not performing well on tests, well, it might be that they haven't studied enough math, but it might be that they haven't even prepared for a test or don't know how to prepare for a test. So we have found that, hey, in our consultation process, let's really identify not what the perceived goal and need is, but what is the actual need and goal, and address that. And I found in many cases, wow, we're really missing these foundational skills. Let's address that first and see how that impacts tutoring. And if we still need tutoring, we can do tutoring, but let's address these important skills.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in the consultation process, part of that's the reason we get to know your students so well, and we want to meet them face to face, or executive, our education consultant wants to meet your student, because that's how we get to know what's going on, because it's so much more than just academics, right, Chris?
It is, yeah. And, it's interesting because I think there's no more effective storyteller from the sports world than Yogi Berra. And he could say one thing in a very pithy statement that was just expansive in meaning. And one of them was, when you see a fork in the road, take it. Mm-hmm. So many times, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, Jessica, that when a family will contact us, typically in middle school or early stages of high school, once years of both academic as well as executive functioning skills accumulated deficits occur, then many times they're trying to figure out, well, which one do we fix now? We've got some grades we need to sort of recover and boost, but at the same time, the study skills and all the other things that have sort of contributed to this, what do we do? So as our good friend Yogi Berra might say, both. And that's tough because there's a lot of times I've only got enough time for this, I've got enough time for that, et cetera. So, but it really is important to sit down and figure out what is really the cause and what is the effect. And sometimes it is more important to address the thing that we know is really the root cause, but it's also addressing it will have the greater medium to longer term investment or return on that time invested. And that's why taking a look at executive functioning skills, even as early as elementary school, in what those will look like at each sort of grade level appropriate area. That's one of the reasons we're talking today, but it's like so many of the questions. And in fact, that very question just came in.
We did. We already have 2 questions.
Yes. And the one question I had received was that very question. And I want to open it up for you folks to answer. My student is struggling with both study and executive skills as well as academic skills. We don't know which one to choose. What would sort of be this panel's recommendation for a choice or maybe a phased approach toward addressing both items?
So, one of the, let's start off simple, and one of the things that stands out to me consistently, when we're talking about these type of executive function skills is, as a student, it often shows up in homework. Okay, so one, is the homework being done? Or are they forgetting it altogether? Right? That has to do with an executive function right there. Another one might be, hey, guess what? I did my homework, and I'm so proud I did it. But guess what? I forgot to turn it in. Or I can't remember where I left it. What is your
We see that, don't we?
Yeah, what does your backpack look like? Those types of things. So it can show up as simply as that, and when we can, and so they're not going to need tutoring for that. They're going to need, hey, let's talk about how you can begin to organize your life. Let's talk about how you can manage your time and prioritize things, and make sure that things are in a place where they need to be, and looking at deadlines and making sure you're planning ahead and completing that task on time, and have the support network to be able to provide that encouragement and accountability so that you get there, because it's not like we're turning on a switch, right? We're human beings. It's a process. And as tutors, we get to help with that. Certainly as parents, we ought to be involved in that, but our executive function program is designed to actually provide that mentorship on an ongoing basis and the accountability so that there can be the cultivation of those necessary skills for success. So that's my answer.
That's awesome. Let's look at another question.
Real quick, the tough answer there, Chris, just to touch on that real quick is, it really, they have to go together. You have to find a way, whether that's
100%.
multiple splitting sessions or maybe devoting a certain amount of time each session, because a lot of the executive functioning skills that I've found working with our students is repetition. Repetition and that process of always, each time. So I always recommend incorporating it into the tutoring sessions, possibly elongating them slightly, even if that includes a break for the younger kids, if they're not quite there yet. But the hard answer is you got to do them both simultaneously. So,
and the other thing to look at real quickly on that is not only the techniques, which we've addressed so far, but the tools. What tools can be used? And I'm sure we'll address that as this conversation continues on. But the one thing that in the old days, the dog ate the homework. Now it's the teacher hasn't graded it. Now that we're in this electronic world, and the backpack you were mentioning, Byron, might no longer be a backpack. It's now it's one of
Chromebook.
these guys, right?
Chromebook.
And so this is where the grade book is. This is where everything. So if the teacher hasn't graded, that can buy a day or 2 or 3 of cover for the student, and then they don't get it turned in. So that's where the tools come in. And even if somebody were to bring on an external tutor to look at that, they'd have to have access to the grade book, the electronic system, and all of that, which that's where so many parents throw up their hands. It's like that's really where the battle begins so many times. So I just wanted to throw out the tools aspect in addition to the techniques.
Well,
Definitely.
this leads into a good next question. What do executive skills or study skills training look like? How are they developed?
All right, well, you're going to ask me, okay. So
Yes, Byron.
well, it begins, well, again, and let's assess what's going on. So with our programming, we actually start off with a score sheet, okay? And the student will self-assess, in a number of different categories. And then we want the parent to do the same thing on behalf of the student, right? So we're going to get both of those, perspectives. And when we do that, we're really going to be able to zero in on, because every student is going to have strengths and every student is going to have weaknesses. We all do, right? And it's about identifying the strengths as much as it is the weaknesses, right?
Absolutely.
So when we can identify those strengths and capitalize on them, and then again, spend time on those weaker areas, they're going to be able to develop those over time. But it's like everything else. It's a habit. And when you know exactly what strategies to work with that can help them, and this is where I love Mindprint, because it does give us, it complements this in a very real way. We can have real specific strategies that work with them because of who they are. So we're not going against the grain, we're going with the grain. So I would start off answering the question in identifying it, and then working with them on where their strengths and their weaknesses are, cultivating these new habits. That's what they are. We have to practice them, and the repetition, like you talked about before, but knowing which ones they're more willing, they're more naturally inclined to perform is going to be real helpful to us in helping them be successful.
And I think Chris said before, the process of this, it's not just you wave a magic wand and all of a sudden, you're working on executive function. It's a process, right? Because to learn a new habit, you have to get rid of the old habits.
Mm-hmm.
It's a complete change of mindset and practice, and that takes time. So I agree with what I've seen work with our students is incorporating it into part of the tutoring session at the end. Typically take the last 15 minutes, whatever, incorporate it in. I've got tutors that are just doing executive function. That's all they do. They take literally an hour every week and help that student literally finish projects. How do you block out time? How do you chunk it out, every day? If you know you have a big project coming up next Thursday, you can't wait till Tuesday or Wednesday to do it. You've got to chunk it out, right? And so students have to learn how to do that, because they're not naturally going to do that. They're going to wait till the last minute. That's what they're going to do. And does that work? Especially as you get into high school and college? No way.
Yeah, well, what may seem like a small task to us, to a student, could be considered a complex or major task, right? Well, let's break that down like we do in our tutoring, right? Let's break that down into manageable pieces. What does that look like, right? And so let's start here on this basic level, practice that, move on to the next one, get that under our belt, and keep progressing. Chris, you were itching to say something.
Well, yeah, no, and I'm glad you said what you did, because it amplifies what I was going to interject in that. You just defined expertly the difference between tutoring, or say subject tutoring, versus more proper academic coaching. There can be sort of a subtle distinction. And as Jessica said, it doesn't have to be a separate thing altogether. It can be appended, and perhaps should be appended into a tutoring session, particularly for the middle and high school students. But what you do is you take a look at it, because what does a coach do? A coach is not the player. A coach is the person who is outside of the player, who is observing and taking a look at patterns, taking a look at scenarios, taking a look at the environment, and then figuring out how that must be personalized for the participant, for the player, for the student. Too many times parents, though they can have expert objectivity into their child, sadly, many times they are not the ones to be that person to execute because they're too close to the situation. So that's where sometimes having an outsider, if you will, having that third party, as I like to call this Switzerland neutral third party adult, come in and actually be the person who actually executes that and is the program manager, if you will, to see all these aspects. Then that is how you can sort of anneal that situation. If there is a dynamic tension, say, between the family, then after several weeks of somebody coming in, coaching and doing those sorts of things, helping create, as Jessica said, chunks, or as Byron was alluding, sort of more digestible portions of an overall project. Now we can get there from here. Because face it, that typically doesn't happen in school, right? They're given the assignments, the teacher's doing everything they can to teach the content. They're not always showing them how do you divide this up and bring this in pieces. And that whole power, tension, distance thing as well between a teacher and an adolescent, right? That's where having more of that peer coach coming in, that third party, right? So I just want to put all that together, that you can have all the right tools, systems, processes, everything else, but when it comes down to it, that coach can be the very glue that really brings all these things together, and you see the outcomes be as desired.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Chris, that's a very good answer. Both you and Byron, as usual, very good clarity. I would say that the last piece I would add to that is the coach provides the accountability. So the tutor is there to put a check on, which we all know again, we know our students, we know our kids. They tend to try and skate through it a little bit sometimes, and the coach has to be there saying, no, do that again, try that again, hold them accountable, and that's a big piece of it too at the end of the day.
I want to bring up very specific note-taking and study skills within this whole process, because I think that there are some major gaps that have happened. I don't think the kids know how to study, and I don't think they necessarily want to take notes. And I don't think they understand that when they get to college, they're going to have to take notes. And they may not even know how to take notes, that they don't know how to annotate something. And those skills are so important. And I think that part of us working with a student has to be really breaking it down to not just taking notes on your Chromebook, because that's what they want to do.
Yep.
Writing them down on paper. Same with study skills. I always tell our kids, go to the dollar store and get old-fashioned index cards and write your index card note cards. That will work. That works. I guarantee you. Carry that package of note cards around with you while you're, whatever it is, watching TV, whatever it is. And as well as how to take notes. They don't know how.
It's the bombardment of technology and the advancement of technology, and now AI. They're trained from a very early age. I myself have a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old who is both are in college right now. One's a freshman starting out, and the other is going back. And they are hampered a little bit by the text generation. Now you don't even have to. You can do it through AI. You can just create those. So you're right. It's the one area of they're not really using that sense as far as writing it.
Absolutely not.
There's something mechanical, and there's something that goes on in the brain when you're writing it down. And I know excuses do pop up. I'm better. I have a photographic memory. I don't need to write stuff down, and lo and behold, it fails them at the wrong time. So it's one of those tough things. I agree. We need to, in what we're doing when we're engaged, I think we really need to focus on some of those old-fashioned, if you will, skills.
Absolutely.
I had a great discussion with a local teacher this morning over a couple of burritos. And it was interesting that what he was mentioning was that the school, and we've seen it, my own kids having gone through that school, that there's been a very active process to reduce busy work, but not throw meaningful tactics to the curb. And things like annotations, right? They can be done in more sane ways than just busy work. And things like 3x5 index cards, right? There a lot of the times those come, particularly in a course like biology, where that wonderful photographic memory you just mentioned a minute ago, Brendan, is not as pervasive as a lot of students might lead us to believe, right? So things like index cards and those wonderful, incredibly high-tech things called highlighted, in different colors, right? And kind of like the background I have here, right? Where you can color things different ways, terms and vocabulary. There are a lot of tools that I think with the Common Core experiment, we've seen that some of these things have been thrown out. And so, but now a lot of the teachers that have done a few trips around the sun are now reincorporating a lot of these tools and things because they have been seen from the past as helping students. And so I think there's a new opportunity for people to revisit some of the things that are time tested and had worked and bring those in. And in many times, it may not be the parent that has the reception from the child saying, hey, you got to do this, but maybe that's where maybe there's an opportunity for tutors, for academic coaches to come in and use tools of these various sorts. And again, leave room for the individuality of the student. Some may not want that, others will. But what doesn't work is, yeah, I got it, don't worry. It's, and so that's sort of the impasse. And particularly, I'm going to mention one more sobering thing. Byron and I, we did a webinar, I think back in June, when the NAEP test results came out. If all the new tools and technologies and everything that have been coming out have been so wonderful, then why have we seen a 12-year skid on test scores and ACT scores having fallen to the lowest level in 30 years? I mean, something has to be changed up a little bit, right? Which goes to another question I think we should quickly address, because it is part and parcel to this: working memory. And what are some ways that as we're going through study skills and all this stuff, it's one thing to go through and all the annotation, but how do we instill that working memory so students can deliver on exams and projects and stuff? What tips do you guys have regarding how working memory can be exercised and expanded?
That is a good question.
Yeah, no, when it comes to working memory, we're talking about it in a simple way to look at it. Let's just say you asked me for my phone number, right? And I read off to those 7 or 10 digits. If you had poor working memory, you would go 505 what? But if you had good working memory, you would be able to say 505-359-8300, and get a hold of me directly. So one of the things that I would do is I would say, okay, I want you, when you're starting off basically with a person, right, if they've got poor working memory. So when I say these numbers, I want you to visualize them or write them down.
Write them down.
And so that you're actually making a connection. There's a synapse there, right? You're making that connection between what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. And then if you can repeat it, right? Once again, you're using all these functions to communicate that. So I would say visualization, the ability to, if you need to draw it out, write it out, do that, especially if you've got good visual memory, right? And then the other one is repetition,
Right.
Repeat it loudly. One of the things that I, for example, myself is I'll meet somebody and we'll exchange names for the first time, and I'll start carrying a conversation. Then 5 minutes later, I go, man, what is their name? So what I'm trying to learn to do is stop and then do an association. Okay, Byron, okay, I'm going to think of Lord Byron. You know what I'm saying? And it's going to help me to remember. So those are some of the tips I would give, in times of working memory.
Great. We have a couple of questions which tie in. So that's good. Just one second. It's about memory. So that's good. So I think you answered. Does this help students stay motivated while studying?
I think I'll answer that briefly. What I've seen in my own kids, as well as a couple of the students that we've worked with, I think it definitely helps because there's nothing, it's that if you're not planning, what's the saying, Chris? You know it. Failing to plan is planning to fail. I think the plan and the structure gives them more comfort because rather than just aimlessly trying to think of everything, the fire hose is on and you're drinking from it. If you can break that down and have a structure to it, you can find a lot of comfort in that structure. And I've seen that in my own kids as well as some of the students we've had.
Absolutely.
That's so important. We're trying to
Absolutely.
develop that structure, like that rut. If you could imagine the Oregon Trail, right? All those wagons passed over and over time. You can still see the ruts in certain places, right? That's happened by that repetition. So we're creating these habits that at first they're harder to generate, but after repeated use, they become easier and hopefully more natural, so that these skills that we're trying to cultivate become a part of who you are, not something that you're trying to force happen anymore.
Exactly.
And trying to bridge that gap too, as you mentioned, Brendan, there's the plan into, the adults and everybody else who's running, it all makes sense, right? We've been through that. But again, with the young, as was mentioned earlier here in this discussion, that sometimes there's still a gap with a student and they're not quite sure. There can be fear, anxiety, apprehension, all of that. That's where having the coach that we've mentioned a few times can put some skin on the situation, right? The plan is like the skeleton, right? And skeletons, they're great at Halloween to scare people, boo, but we want to make it an easier, a warmer and an approachable sort of thing. Kind of like the old story about the little girl who was scared at night with the thunder or whatever, and she went to see her dad and mom, and well, go back to bed, everything's fine. And she got scared again, and dad called out to her, it's okay, and she came running in and said, oh honey, I thought you were okay in bed. Well, I know you love me, but I want some love with skin on it. And so she was scared. She went to her parent that way. In a similar way, that's where the warmth of the natural academic coach can help that student see it and realize it and then excel with it. So it's something to consider if a parent there's a gap between what their student should absorb, they think, and versus reality. That very gap can be that coach.
One, and you touched on it, Chris, the element of what you call emotional control. And, kids, obviously they develop that. And I think the tutor can also help develop that, because kids tend to be they're thinking about what happened in the past. They're thinking about, oh my God, what's going to happen in the future? It's hard for them to stay in the present, which it's frankly hard for a lot of adults to do that too. It's one of the biggest challenges we have. But that anxiety and that fear and some of those emotional elements, they'll hinder what's going on in the present because they're scattered. They're in the past. So I think providing that structure and that discipline, it's almost like a nice warm blanket. You don't have to really worry about it as much, because I know I've developed this habit, and it now, takes care of that for me, and I can focus on other things. So.
Yeah.
Can I tell
Up on time?
Yeah.
Can I just tell one really quick story?
Definitely.
Because we need to tell some stories here. I want to tell you a story about so many kids I sit with, and we talk about how the executive function and the time management, how important it is, especially going into high school, to be able to manage your time. And I've had students say, and I say, it's going to be, you have to do this because it's going to be so much more challenging when you get to college, especially if you're on your own and there's no parent there to help you manage your time and say, time to do this or time to do that, or not allow you to do certain things. And the students, a lot of them go, oh, it's going to be so much easier in college. And I said, oh, really? You really think it's going to be easier? And I give them the example of what I saw when I went to visit my daughter in college. And I tell them, in the middle of the day, there are parties going on night and day. And I was visiting her coming down the elevator, and there were these girls all dressed up, like high heels, right, in the middle of the day. And I said to Carly, where are these girls going? She goes, oh yeah, Mom, they're going to a dage. I was like, what is a dage? A day party. What? She said, oh, there's parties going on all day. So if you
Yeah.
don't have the discipline, and I tell the kids, if you don't have the discipline to say, I'm not going to the Daish today, I'm going to go to the library and study because I have a big test tomorrow, you're going to
Yeah.
have a really difficult freshman year. And I
Yeah.
think the kids have to understand that that's the reality of what they're going to be dealing with in freshman year. So you don't want them to crash and burn in freshman year, because it's a huge transition to be away from your family if you are away.
Yeah, they think they're very, very independent when they're in high school, and they don't realize until they get to college how many things that the parents were helping
That's
them
right.
do and getting them to do. So,
That's
Um,
right.
Well, here's
Well-
the final story that meets that exactly, Brendan, was it Mark Twain, none other than Mark Twain, who said when he was 18, he was surprised how ignorant his quote unquote old man was. He got to be about 21 and he realized, well, maybe the guy did know a few things. He got to be about 25 and he was amazed at how much that old man had learned in the past 7 years. Right?
yeah,
And I think we see a lot of college students and others have the same. So, so Mark, if
Well-
that was Mark Twain's experience, I think there's a lot of others that might feel the same.
well, that sounds like a very good ending on a Mark Twain story. Sounds like a good place to wrap things up. So, and I want to thank all of you, obviously, for your input and your insights. Thank you for everybody for being on this, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching a recorded version. Hopefully you found this to be informative and helpful. That's what we're always trying to do here at Tutor Doctor. And if you'd like to learn more about study skills, executive functioning skills, I would definitely encourage you to reach out, contact your local Tutor Doctor office. You can also do that by visiting our website at www.tutordoctor.com, or you can contact us via telephone at 1-800-4TUTORS. That's 1-800-488-8677. So thank you, everyone. And, we look forward to seeing you